Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to an episode of Shadowtalk. My name is Bull, and as always, this video was made possible by the wonderful, wonderful support of my Patreon backers. Without them, I couldn't do these. If you're interested in seeing more videos like this, my Bulldrek videos, my Let's Play videos, or are interested in the creative writing efforts that I do that are only available to my Patreon backers, please check out the Patreon link in the description below. Alright, so this week on Shadowtalk, I threw out a question to people on my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Bulldrek if you're interested. I will try to remember to put a link to that in the description below as well. But I threw out a question. If you could ask me one question about my career in gaming, my career with Shadowrun or whatever else, what would it be? So here's some of the questions and some answers. So the very first question I got was, one of the first questions I got was, how did you get your into the industry? I actually answered that in my very first Shadow Talk. The video is called How I Got Into This Mess in the First Place, I believe. Again, I will try to put a link in the description below so that you can go check that out. But I kind of go a little bit long-winded about my history with Shadowrun and everything. But my was with Shadowrun. And I just, I kind of fell into it originally. It was just a matter of being friendly, being in the right place at the right time, and getting an invite from Mike Mulvihill. So, alright, the second question. Was Shadowrun a love at first sight or a slow burn romance? That is a great question, and I honestly would say slow burn romance. I saw Shadowrun across the room and thought she was kind of cute. However, I didn't work up the courage to really talk to her for a couple of years. I talked about it, I think when I talked a little bit about one of my videos where I talk about getting into gaming and stuff, I talked about a little bit about this as well. But the short answer is, I had a couple of friends who were into Shadowrun a little bit when I was in high school. When it first came out, I thought it was really cool. I even made a couple of characters, and we had a couple of like one-night game session type deals. But we never really got a chance to play a campaign or anything like that, and I didn't really ever get into the game or anything. Didn't really read the books or any of that stuff until a couple of years later, when I was in college, and I got involved with a game Steve Tinner was running. And Tinner, that campaign was the one that really dragged me in and basically said, this game is amazing and awesome, and I fell in love, and that's where I've been ever since. So, yeah, like I said, it took me a couple of years, not because of the game itself, just because I didn't get a chance to really play and experience the game for a couple of years. Alright, so, next question. As a recognized RPG celebrity, that makes me laugh. I wouldn't say I'm a recognized RPG celebrity. I'm a dork who annoys the hell out of people. I will admit that a lot of folks in the industry know me, but I am far from a celebrity. But the question is are RPGs in general an income, an expense, or do they break even? Unless you're really, really talented and or really, really lucky, they're an expense. You might get lucky and break even, but generally speaking, they're an expense. I think unless you own your own company, and even then, it's not going to be, it's not like you're just going to be raking in the money. But I think either unless you own your own company, or you're lucky enough to be one of those very, very talented writers who can just crank out material after material for multiple games, or just write book after book after book for a single game. It's not it's not a actual job. It is a hobby that you do as a job at best. I think very, very few people are able to make a living doing just RPG work. And I think there are a few people that can kind of break even because basically they can make enough money to finance their RPG hobby. But I think for the majority of freelancers and the majority of people working in the game industry, their interest in the hobby far outstrips their income from the hobby. So, like for example, when I was working on Shadowrun, I made a little bit of money working on Shadowrun, and I would generally get copies of the books. So I didn't have to spend money on Shadowrun. But if I wanted to buy extra copies, or if I wanted to buy other stuff, that was all money I had to pay. And I, of course, have a vast interest in a lot of different games, so I will spend way more money than I would ever make on gaming. Alright, next question. If you had a time machine and could replace D&D as the one that made it big and became the template from which most other RPGs were created, what would you replace it with? I think that's a loaded question, and I don't think it works. D&D was very much a right place at the right time. Fantasy was a big thing back in the early 70s. So I don't think a non-fantasy genre would have really managed to capture the attention that it did. And as much as people want to mock and don't like or are unhappy with things like the Jack Chick tracts, the Dark Dungeons thing that everybody makes fun of, or the 2020 scare about the steam tunnels and all that other jazz, the whole Satan angle and everything like that. I'll be completely honest. I think D&D managed to become it managed to grow to a certain point by the end of the 70s. But I think that the Satan scare, basically, as the satanic cult scare of D&D, I think that's what really made it big. That catapulted it up. So like I said, I don't think you could have done that without the fantasy angle of it, first of all. Second of all, I don't know. Like I said, I can't imagine another game having been in that point. Like, I can't put Shadowrun back then because the cyberpunk world of Shadowrun didn't exist then. What Shadowrun was a reflection of, which was basically the 80s. Shadowrun was very much a product of its era and its time, as was Cyberpunk 2020. So like I said, I think, and again, I don't think you could have put the White Wolf games into there either. Again, because of when they came out. White Wolf was a reflection of the popularity of things like Anne Rice and such. Go back to the 70s, and vampires and werewolves were still basically movie monsters. They weren't the romanticized version that came along later on. So like I said, I actually can't imagine anything else have been there. I also think that D&D's mechanics made it a relatively simple entry. It was something very logical and fairly easy to grasp. Even if you didn't understand how things like THAC0 worked, you had charts. You didn't need to understand how it worked. You didn't need to understand the calculations. You just looked it up. So it was one of those things that people could sit down and just learn and play. Things like your storyteller games, like for White Wolf and whatever, and some of the more modern games where it's a lot more of a story-driven game as opposed to a rules-driven game. Those are, I think, they're a little harder to wrap your brain around sometimes, for some people. And I don't think those would have caught on nearly as well. I think they would have just ended up basically being party games. And I don't think they would have ever really gone anywhere. I think you needed that solid rules structure for people to sit down to wrap their brain around. The storyteller game's a nice way to graduate from. Basically, you learn the rules, you learn what a role-playing game is, and now you want to go and do something a little bit different, expand it. Same thing with like Shadowrun. Shadowrun's just too rules heavy to have worked. I mean, Shadowrun's it has so many moving parts to it that, especially the first and second editions, there were so many moving parts that I don't think that it would have worked as a template type game. So I think D&D was really just a combination of right place, right time, right everything. And like I said, I can't imagine anything else having made it big and become the template like that. All right, next question. Which book was your favorite project to work on and why? All right, this one I'm going to actually give you 3 answers, because there are 3 books that really had an impact on me for working on. The first one was Year of the Comet. That was the first one that I ever got to really, really dive into and have any sort of impact on. I got invited to a freelancer summit in Chicago at the old FASA headquarters by Mike Mulvihill, and a bunch of us were flown up there, and we basically spent a weekend locked in a small room brainstorming. There was a whiteboard involved, and there was all kinds of crazy ideas that were written down, a lot of which never went anywhere because they were terrible or just wouldn't work for Shadowrun, and a lot of ideas that eventually became what was in Year of the Comet or became ideas that were used later on. But that was the first time I really was able to get into that sort of environment, and it was just amazing to spend a weekend with that group. One of the things I think about freelancing that I always have a rough time with is that, I like the group setting. That's my one complaint with the way. I think if there's one thing that I would ever change, if I ever bought out Catalyst, say, if I ever won crazy amounts of money and decided I was buying Catalyst, I think the one thing I would want to do was try to set up Catalyst once again with a central office rather than being a virtual office the way it is. Virtual is very convenient. I would also probably do these in-house summits on a regular basis. Because the virtual office is really handy, really convenient, just work over email and everything like that. But I also think that having that atmosphere where everybody is right there, bouncing ideas off of each other, it's an amazing atmosphere to be in. And it was so much fun to do, and it was so, because you just have this constant, I mean, besides the fact that you just are bouncing ideas off, which you can do on email, but it's obviously slower, even if everybody's online. Or you can do it even on, as a Skype call or whatever. But again, trying to organize everybody, especially when everybody's in different time zones or different countries, can be a nightmare because you're going to be missing people. So then you're dealing with writing up summaries and people working off of that. When you've got everybody in the same room, though, not only are you bouncing the ideas off of, but there's an energy to it that you don't get working virtually. So there's that. The second thing, I think, the second time, and this kind of goes along with what I was just talking about, was when we were working on Shadowrun 5. I got invited out to Seattle for Catalyst Game Labs. And we basically we actually did this twice. We spent a couple of weekends. The first time was pure brainstorming, pure ideas, and then the second time was taking everything and trying to refine it and playtesting a little bit and stuff. And that was, and again, we were basically just collaborating. We were able to just around the table tossing ideas back and forth at each other, and just taking the energy of the room and running with it. And it was just an amazing experience to do, and it was so much fun. My third one would be going back to 2001. Early 2002, somewhere in there. I ended up through pure happenstance getting involved with Cynthia Celeste Miller's original version of Cartoon Action Hour, and that was the first time I worked on a game that was not a property. It wasn't like Shadowrun is a property, so you're confined by the game world, you're confined a little bit by the game rules or what came before, what's coming up, whatever. Working on I was mostly playtesting, but I was also able to actually toss out some rules ideas that Cynthia ran with, which was fantastic. So with Cartoon Action Hour, though, like I said, we weren't confined by having something already set in stone that we were working off of, other than its 80s cartoons, action cartoons. We were trying to emulate G.I. Joe or Transformers or any of those action cartoons from the 80s, but there wasn't anything specific that we were, stuck with. So there was a freedom to that, to just kind of go crazy and do whatever you want. And so that was a lot of fun. So those are the three books that I worked on, I think, that were the most fun to do. I'll also add in that working on missions was an amazing project, just overall, but that was a long-term project where there was a lot more involved with just working on one thing. And it was also a giant headache because I was kind of in charge. And when you put in charge of something, that ratchets up the stress, and it makes it a little less fun to work on. I'll say that. It was still a fantastic experience, don't get me wrong. I loved the 5 years that I spent doing it. I wouldn't trade that for anything. But, like I said, I think those the three that I mentioned, especially Year of the Comet, because that was the first time I really was able to do something like that. And that was the first time I really felt like I was a part of the gaming industry to any real extent. Alright. Why is it, after all this celebrity, you keep rooming with the same losers at GenCon, you freak? Or cons, sorry, not just GenCon. So he's also talking about Origins. This is from Andrew Cohen, and Andrew's been my perpetual roommate for the most part since, over a decade now, I think. And why wouldn't I keep rooming with the same losers? You guys are awesome. I love you guys. If you could dive into any current or past game setting as a developer or writer, which one would you pick and what would you do? Oh God. That's a tough one. Shadowrun, obviously, is one that I like working on. I think the big one that I would love to work on, although I know it would be a nightmare, would be Star Wars. I grew up with Star Wars. I was 3 years old when Star Wars came out. I saw it in the theater, and I've been just a Star Wars nut ever since. That is pretty much would be my holy grail. Although I will also add the caveat that I would have liked to have worked on Star Wars during the West End era. Because during the West End era, they had Star Wars as a film project was more or less done at that point. There were no books, like no extended universe novel series. So there weren't the restrictions. The West End writers, for the most part, seem to have. I don't know specifically. I'm sure Lucasfilms still had some, input. But it feels like the West End Games era of Star Wars really had this freedom to just kind of go crazy and do whatever they wanted. Star Wars wasn't... it had been this huge thing, but the huge thing had kind of run its course by that point, and now it was just sort of this thing. And nobody really paid attention to the RPG, I don't think, from the Lucasfilm side of things. So, I think that you just had this freedom to just really just have fun with the world, expand the world, and all you had to work with, all you had to deal with was these three movies. So you just had this, and so you had this huge world, this huge universe that was just completely open. And I think that you could have just done so much and gone crazy and just had so much fun with it back then. And I would love to have just been a part of that. I would have loved to have been, especially with some of the guys working on it back then. Aaron Alston especially. I only met Aaron twice, I want to say, just in passing. Aaron wouldn't have known my name, or probably wouldn't have recognized me if he ever saw me again. Before he passed on. But I met him like twice, and he just seemed like a really, really nice guy, and his work was amazing. So I think that being involved in any capacity would have been amazing. Taking what I know now and going back to that time as a developer would be my dream. But even just getting to work on projects as a writer would have been just blow me away. West End is by far my favorite game version of Shadowrun or Star Wars, and like I said, it was just I ran a campaign in college for this West End Star Wars, and it was just amazing, and because you could just, like I said, you could just let your imagination go wild. It was just terrific. Of all the GenCon tournaments you played in, which one was your favorite, and who was your favorite GM named Jeff? That's from Jeff Jones. He was actually one of the GMs for the only time I ever got to play in the tournament back in 90 something, 96, 97, somewhere in there. And Jeff was one of the GMs for us. And then Jeff has since GM'd for me a few times when I was running tournaments and stuff after that, and he's a great guy. So favorite tournament I ever played in was probably that one, because that's the only one I've ever played in. And you were my only GM named Jeff, so you win. Congratulations. Alright. What's up with the dragon skeleton on Mars? That is from... Was that from the original Missions book? I don't remember exactly which book that was in. One of the Shadowrun books, but it got followed up on later on. And I believe it ended up just being a hoax. I don't remember all that well, but yeah. The dragon skeleton on Mars was explained at some point. I don't believe there was any. It wasn't a real thing. It was faked one way or another. That's the short answer. All right. Do you ever sit back and say to yourself, "Man, I wished I worked for BattleTech"? No. I've seen the BattleTech fans. They make the Shadowrun fans look sane. I'm also just never got into BattleTech as much. I like the giant stompy robots. And I've picked up a fair amount of knowledge just through pure osmosis over the years, but I don't know the BattleTech background that well. I don't get into the game all that much. So sadly, no, I don't wish I worked on BattleTech. After seeing the Facebook for Herb, Herb was the line developer for BattleTech for quite a while, and you for so long, it definitely seems like game contributors like yourself get paid next to nothing. Have you ever gotten to the point where you think to yourself, I just can't keep doing this? How do you keep the motivation and the creative juices going through the hard times? Very good question, and it's tough. I've never thought I just can't keep doing this. Just because I like doing it too much. You don't step into the job as a developer or any sort of position of I want to say authority, I guess, in the gaming industry to get money. It's a sad fact. I wish it was otherwise, but if you're doing this, you are doing it because you love it, not because you want money. And anybody who does get into it for the money gets out of it really quickly and doesn't usually ever get to that point. Some folks do eventually just burn out or whatever too, but and to be honest, I had issues, especially with the whole motivation and creative juices bit, especially as my depression and anxiety issues and stuff mounted over the last few years. It's one of the reasons I eventually had to step down. Was I hit a point where I wasn't able to keep going. And it wasn't because I didn't want to. I did. I still wish I could step back in and work on it again. I loved doing it. But the fact of the matter is, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress. And it doesn't pay very well. But when you see the products come out, when you see people playing with adventures that you wrote, adventures that you helped design or guide or edited or worked with other people to write, it's an amazing thing. I love that is the one thing I love about going to the convention still, is I love going and seeing a room with a dozen or 18 tables, and every single one of them is filled to capacity with people playing games that I worked on, like personally had a hand in working on. There's nothing better than that. So that was honestly, that was my reward for all the, the time I put in, was getting to see that. Getting to see people having fun. Seeing people online talking about the adventures they posted, the characters they've created to run in these games. It's just fantastic. So that was my motivation, and that's what helped keep me going all the years that I've done that. Because at the end of the day, you're doing it for two people. You're doing it for yourself because you love it, and you're doing it for the fans because you want to see people playing what you're working on. All right, that is all the questions that I've got, so that's where I'm going to go ahead and end this. If anybody has any more questions for me, feel free to shoot me a message on Facebook, or post, actually the best way to do that, post in the comments below here. I will take all the comments that I get here for this video, and eventually, once I get enough of them, I will do a follow-up video if people are interested. So, all right, well, thank you for watching. Hope you had a good time. Hopefully it was informative. Hopefully I'm not, a complete egotistical asshole. Click the like button if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you want to see more videos. And again, check out my Patreon link down in the link below, in the description below, and consider backing me so that I can continue to do these videos and continue to do what I'm enjoying doing right now. So thank you guys very much, and have a good one.